Dear video professional, the elements of this videotape represent the work of creative professionals like yourself. Unauthorized duplication of this tape not only is a federal crime, but also contributes to the destruction of an industry that you helped create. Please do your part by not duplicating this videotape. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tony Stutterheim, and welcome to Professional Techniques for Flying Logo Animations. In this tape, I'm going to show you some of the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way for creating network quality flying logo animations. And our first step is to create a quality logo, and for that we're going to go into Modeler. The first thing we're going to talk about in Modeler is the text function. And the text function is the function that lets us pull in any of the PostScript fonts that come with the Video Toaster system. Now you'll notice right now that we don't have any fonts loaded. It says none here, and if we try to scroll down in a list of fonts, it still says none. So that means we need to load a font to use. And so before we load the font, we need to pick which font we want. And for that, we'll consult the handy-dandy Video Toaster font guide here. And you can just look through here and pick the font style that you like or that your client likes. And for this example, I think I'll go with the Baskerville font. So we go back to the text function and click on Load. And since Baskerville starts with B, it's going to be in the font bank A through C. We'll click on that down here and find Baskerville. Right there it is. Now you can see that Baskerville is our current font. And if we try to scroll down, that's the only font in the list. Now I'm going to just type in some text, and Modeler will create that text using that font style. Okay, now I'm going to hit the Control-A key to center it in this window down here. And we'll make it a little bit bigger here. Now you can see that it makes nice, evenly spaced points and smooth-looking fonts for all of our text and our letters here. There's one thing you need to keep in mind before you start creating text. That's to check in the Options panel and check the curve division. Right now it's set to medium. And what the curve division does is tell Modeler how many points to give in a curve such as this. And the higher the curve division, the finer the curve will be and the smoother your fonts will be. So we're going to bump it up to fine as opposed to medium and remake this logo. Now, so you'll see the difference. I'm going to make this new logo in a different layer. So I'll just click on layer 2, go back to the text function, and just say OK. We don't need to type anything in because it's already in there. So if we just click on OK, it'll generate it again. Now if I zoom in here, the period key, and compare the two layers, the first layer with the first logo we generated, this being the second layer with the second logo we generated, you'll see that there's many more points in this version, which was the second version we did with the fine curve division, than this version, which we did with the medium curve division. So I always like to use the fine curve division when I create the logos so that if you get close to a logo, you won't see any of these facets when they're rendered. Otherwise, if you have this logo, you may start seeing some sort of chunkiness around here if you get very close to it. So this is by far the easiest way to create text in Modeler, is to actually use the text function and load in these PostScript fonts. Now there are other tools in Modeler that we're going to look at that make it even easier to generate more complex looking types of text. And those are the macros. The macros are just little tools that are included with the Modeler, and they have all sorts of different things in them, like being able to center objects, all sorts of just wacky little things. But the things that we're interested in are the things that deal with text and fonts. So the first one that comes to mind is the text macro, which is different than the text function down here in that it lets you compose several lines of text as well as doing some other neat little things like choosing what kinds of text types that you want, whether you want it to be blocky, whether you want it to have that chiseled kind of beveled look or rounded edges. You can adjust the justification on your lines of text that you type in down here. And so the only font that we have available to us right now is the Baskerville font, because that's the one we just loaded in. Now, one of the bad things about this compose text function is that you can't load fonts directly from it. For that, you have to go back to the text function and load a new font. So if you want to get another font or have several fonts in there, you have to go back to the text function and load those. So we'll just load in another one here, just for example, say the Diamond font. Okay, now we're not going to do anything with it here, but we have loaded it in. So now when we look in the text macro, it'll be available to us in our list. So that's kind of a drawback to this compose text macro. Okay, before we actually create any text in here, I'm going to go into a different layer. So we have a nice blank workspace to work with here. And we'll go back to the text macro, select the font that we want, and for this one we'll say the Diamond font. Now we can just go down here and type in some text. Hit OK, and it's going to generate this text for us using this font. And it's going to flash around here a little bit. It's lining up our text for us and centering it and things. Okay, now I'm going to hit Control A to center up this text in this window here. Okay, so here's what it did. It put in all of the words that we wanted in our little logo that we're creating here, and it center justified them for us and spaced them out nice and evenly for us. But it did one other thing here that I'm not too fond of. If you look back here, you see a second layer of text, and we don't really need that or want that. We could get by with just this first foreground layer if we wanted to, or either one of these layers would be fine. We don't need two layers of text. That's not really very useful. I'm not sure why they made that macro so it does that. So I hardly ever, I can't think of any instance when I've actually used this function. So the functions that I do use, though, let me just go to another layer here. Functions that I do use are the block, chisel, and round functions, text types. And also notice one other thing. We were using the Diamond font before. When we came back into the compose text macro, it reset our font back to Baskerville. Now this can screw you up sometimes, so just sort of beware of that. So we'll click back down to the Diamond font, which is what we wanted. And this time we have block selected. Now let's click OK and see what it does. Going to do the same kind of flashing around here, centering things for us. Okay, now you can see what it did. Now we actually have polygons in between our front and back face. Now this is actually useful because what it's effectively done here is extruded our front faces back and given it depth, which is actually a useful thing. But the other thing that it did, which I'm not too fond of, let me just zoom in here for you. Hit G on the keyboard to go to the place where I want to go and zoom in with the period. You see I've got this extra layer here in the middle. Now here's my front face, here's my back face, and we've got this extra chunk of polygons in here which we really don't need. So whenever I use this text macro, if I'm going to make the block text like this, I'll usually just, and I'm going to fit it back in the window here again, I'll usually select these back polygons I know I'm never going to see unless we see around to the back of the logo. I'll just go in here with a volume tool and enclose those back polygons that I'm going to cut out that I know I don't need and just get rid of them. And I'm going to zoom in here to make sure I'm lined up properly with my volume tool. So again, using exclude mode in the volume tool, it's just going to get rid of the things that are totally encompassed in the volume that we drug out. So I'm going to cut those. And now I'm going to turn on the include tool and just pull these points, which make up sort of the back face of our logo, and pull them back to where the other ones were. And so I'm going to go into Modify, click on Move, and I'm going to hold down the Control key. In Modeler 3.0, if you hold down the Control key when doing several functions like move and bend like that, it will lock you to the axis that you're working on. So I'm going to hold down the Control key, hold down the left mouse button, and pull back to the right. And you can see I can move the mouse quite a bit without the text moving where I don't want it to. I want it to move straight back, and because I'm holding down the Control key, it's going to move it straight back for me. Okay? So now, turn off the inclusion. Now you can see we've eliminated several unneeded polygons that we had making up this back face of this text here. Now what that will do for you is decrease your rendering time. Since you're never going to see these polygons anyway, you might as well get rid of them. If you don't get rid of them, Lightwave has to calculate them anyway, so you might as well get rid of them. Let's take a look at a couple of the other tools in the text macro. Again, I'm going to go to another layer, back over to the Objects menu, back into the text macro. Let's take a look at the Chisel function. Now this is basically a beveling. Again, I had to reselect my font here. Click on Chisel and hit OK. And now it's going to bevel my text for me. So now, again, it's extruded it for us. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. It's extruded it for us, giving us some depth here, but also check it out. It's made these bevels all the way around the letters for us. Now, also notice that it created the unwanted polygons again. Since this is the back of the logo, we don't want those polygons. And sure enough, it created them again, just like it did for the block setting. So we can go in and get rid of them again. And I'm going to use the Z key to cut those. Okay, turn on Include, move them back, hold down Control, slide back the back faces so we keep our same extrusion depth. Okay, so now we've sort of cleaned up this chunk of text so that it's a little more efficient when it comes to rendering times. But now look, we also have some problems here. Let me zoom in on the X down here. You can see that there's something kind of funky going on with the beveling here. Bevels are all just whacked out here. And that's one reason why I don't like to use this compose text macro to create my beveled fonts, because you don't have any control over the type of beveling that it does or the depth or any of those types of controls that you have when you're using the bevel tool. And we'll get into the bevel tool here in a second, but just as a warning, I would recommend against using the text macro for doing beveling because of these types of problems. And you can get these types of problems using the bevel tool, but we'll show you how to fix that as well. Okay, I got rid of that instead of going into another layer because it's so munched up I didn't want it anyway. We're going to go back to the text macro one more time, and I'm going to show you the round function. Now this is actually fairly useful. And don't forget to change your font back to the one you want, because inevitably it will change it back to the one at the top of the list, which is not much fun. But anyway, we selected it. Now let's see what the round function will do. Okay, so now we've created rounded edges on our fonts. I'm going to fit this back in the window again. But before that, you can see the types of rounding that we've got going on here. A bit different than the beveling that we had before, in that there are several steps between the edges, and it actually creates a rounded kind of edge. Let me just zoom in here a little bit so you can see it. Whereas the bevel would create an edge straight across here from the side to the face, we've actually got some stepping going on here to make a nice rounded edge for us. But unfortunately, with some fonts, you still have this problem where it just whacks out your edges here. So this text macro in some ways is a good thing, in some ways a bad thing. In some ways it can save you some work, in other ways it creates more work for you. And you have to be careful in the fonts that you use with the text macro, otherwise you can run into these types of problems. The extra polygons back here and these types of errors that it does when it's doing the beveling. So the fix to that is to basically do it yourself, and that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to go into another layer and select the text function again, not the text macro, but the text function, and just generate our logo again that we had before using the diamond font. And let me just fit it into the window here. So right now it's just a flat logo. And one thing to keep in mind when you're beveling things is you're probably going to need 2 copies of whatever you're beveling. And we'll show you why here in a minute, but bear with me. I'm going to go ahead and copy this logo into another layer, select another layer and paste it in there. So now we have the same logo in this layer as we have in this layer. Now I'm going to go ahead and bevel this logo, and just the keyboard shortcut for bevel is B. So we hit B, and now we come up with the bevel screen, the inset and the shift. Now when talking about the inset and the shift, what we're really talking about is the amount that the face of the polygon, the face of your logo, will be extruded out and then shrunk down a little bit. That's what achieves that beveling effect around your font. So for this example, I'm going to use an inset and a shift of 20 millimeters each. So we'll just type in 20 for the inset, 20 for the shift. Bam, there you go. So you can see that it actually took our face, let me just zoom in here a little bit. You can see that it took the face of our logo, shoved it out this way a ways, and then shrunk it down inside of what it was. And that's what's generated this bevel around here. If I just select the front faces, you can see that's where they are. They're on the front now, and there's no faces on the back whatsoever. So this is kind of the reason why we copied that chunk of the logo into the other layer, is because we wanted to preserve this back face here because we're going to want to extrude it. So right now all we have as our logo are front faces and the bevel itself. Now's a good time to give these fonts surface names because you've sort of got them in a separated form. So I'm going to just fit this into the screen here. I've got all 4 of the faces selected, so I'm going to give them a surface name right now. So we'll go into Polygon, on Surface, and change this surface to Logo Front. Okay. Now I know that the rest of these polygons, the rest of these bevel polygons, had a different name, probably default, because that's the name that was in there when we were starting. So what I'll usually do is hit the W key to bring up the polygon statistics. In this case I'm going to select by surface name. So the default, I can tell, is probably the right one because it's got 96 polygons using the default surface name, and there's only 4 using the logo front, which is the one we just created. So I'm going to click on the default, select those, and now what it did is select all the polygons, which are the bevels, select all those polygons, and now I can change their name to Logo Bevel. Okay? So now we have Logo Fronts as the front face and Logo Bevel as the bevels. Now what we need to do is create our extrusion, our sides of our logo here, because we want it to be blocky yet beveled. So we're going to go into our other layer where we copied our logo into and just do a simple extrude on this chunk of the logo. So we're going to multiply, extrude, and we're going to extrude into the Z-axis, which is going this way. And we're going to do 1 segment, which means it's only going to create the back face, and the extent right now is 1 meter. We're going to do half that, say 0.5. Hit return to activate it. And you can see it made it pretty thick for us there. We can always go back and change that if we want by putting a volume around the back face, doing the move again, hold down the control key, and just slide it forward as far as we want to go. Okay? So now we want to give these guys their surfaces, the side surfaces. But before we do that, we want to get rid of the polygons that we don't need, because again, if you got polygons in there that aren't going to show up, you might as well get rid of them, because it's just going to increase your rendering time. And the polygons we don't need are the front face, because we already have our front face in the other layer. Cut those out. And the back face, because we're never going to see behind our logo probably in any of the animations we're doing, so we're going to get rid of those too. So now all we have left are the side faces. We're going to go ahead and give those a surface name. We'll say logo sides. So we've got our sides in one layer, our front face and our bevels in the other layer. Now all we have to do is copy from one layer to the next. So I'm going to copy these side faces into this layer, paste them in there. So now we have our fully beveled logo there with 3 different surface names. So we've got the front faces, the bevels, and the sides. So now we need to talk about some of the problems that you might encounter when you're beveling. And for that I'm going to choose a new font, go back to the text, and I'm going to select just for example here, I'm going to select a very ornate font, one with lots of curved edges and things like that. And I'm going to use the Benson font for that. I'm going to type in a new logo here. Just type in Lightwave. And we're going to bevel this. Now you can see how much more ornate this font is than the last font we had. The last font didn't have any curves like this, or any curves like this down here on this G. And for example, let's just go ahead and bevel this font, and you'll see the types of problems that we're going to have. So bevel, do the same exact thing that we did with our diamond font. 20 inset, 20 shift. Now if we look really close here, this section down here on this A, zoom into that, you'll see we're having problems. It's right around here. This section here, this front face, should actually just come up and end right here and come down. But you see it overshot the edge here. And that's what we're trying to avoid. I'm going to go in Lightwave and render this so you'll see the types of rendering errors that this kind of bevel will give you. So I'm just going to save this out to RAM. Lightwave. Bring it into the layout. I'm going to zoom in on our A here. Now you're not always going to see the rendering errors if you're a long ways away from your logo, but you might cause you problems. So it's better to be aware of this problem, and in a minute here I'll show you how to fix it. Okay, so we'll just render that. So now you can see that right there on the edge where we're having this overshoot going on here, that doesn't look very clean, it doesn't look very nice. So how do we get rid of that? Well, let's go back into Modeler and I'll show you. Now remember when I told you that you're probably going to want a second copy of anything that you bevel? Well, this is a good example of why you would want that. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this munged up copy here and just put our text in again with the text function. Copy that, paste it into another layer. Okay, now I'm going to bevel this again, but this time I'm going to do something different with the shift and the inset. So bring up the bevel tool, and we're going to make the inset -20 and the shift +20. Okay, now what happened? Well, what it actually did was, instead of, let me just zoom in again a little bit, instead of making the bevel come in, it actually flanged it out. And you can see this is kind of backwards from the way we usually want things beveled. We're actually looking at sort of an indented kind of a logo. So our faces are kind of like this towards us right now. Well, we want to put them back like this, and fix this munged up area here at the same time. So you may be asking where are our faces at this point. Well, let's just select the A and find out. It's kind of hard to tell. Let me zoom in again. Okay, they're on the front here all right, but we don't really have a bevel. We have sort of a backwards bevel here that we don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole front face of all these letters of the whole logo, select all those front faces, and the easiest way to do that is again with the Polygon Statistics menu. Find the ones that have greater than 4 vertices, and that's probably going to be your front faces. Hit the plus key. That selects all of our front faces for us. Now we're going to shove those faces back a ways. Modify and move again. Again, hold down the control key. Now you can see what's happening. We're actually reversing the bevel here, which is really the type of bevel that we wanted. We want the edge slanting down like that instead of slanting back. Okay, so the only problem is now our front faces are back behind here, but our edges are in front, and there's no front faces that lock up with these front edges of the bevel here. But to the rescue comes our copy that we had made back here. So we can get rid of these back front faces, if you will, and again we'll just select them with the Polygon Statistics. And just hit Z on the keyboard to get rid of them. And just for safety's sake, while we're using this, I'm going to copy this one more time. And let's see where we are in relationship to our beveled chunk of the logo. Okay, everything's matching up nicely here. So our front faces are now matching up with our bevels. I'll just select them. You can see everything's looking good. Now, one other thing we want to check is the way that these surfaces are facing, the way that the bevels are facing. If they're facing in, that's not a good thing. If they're facing out, that's okay. Because if they're facing in, they're going to render backwards. It's kind of hard to tell which way they're facing, actually. Let's select all of them. It looks like they're facing okay. It looks like they're facing the right direction. If we render it and we see that our bevels are messed up, we'll know pretty quick that that's the problem. All right, so basically all we have left in this layer right now are the bevels. So now we might as well go ahead and name these as such. Name this logo bevels. And then back in our other layer here we have our front faces waiting in the wings. So we'll call that logo front, which we already have created. Okay, now we have our front face and our bevel, and we can put them together. We've got these back faces back here, which in their present state don't really do us any good, but we are going to need them as the polygons that we extrude to make the sides of the logo. Because right now all we have, for all intents and purposes, is the bevel. So we're going to take these back faces back here, and again I'm just going to use the Polygon Statistics, greater than 4 vertices. Those are all our back faces there. Cut those out and paste them into another layer all by themselves. Okay, so these are the ones. These are actually the template that we're going to use as our extrusion, as our sides of our beveled logo. So I'm just going to go ahead and extrude these guys, and I'm hitting N to bring up the numeric extrude requester. Do it on the Z-axis again. And my extent, again, is going to be 0.5, half a meter. Okay, so now we have our side. Control A to bring that up. We have our side polygons generated for our logo. So again, we don't need this front face because it's going to be covered up anyway by the bevel and the new front face that we're going to make. So we'll get rid of that. Z to cut those out. Get rid of the back face too, because we're not going to need that. Z to cut that out. Okay, so what do we have now? We have our sides of our Lightwave logo. We have the bevel of the Lightwave logo. But what about the front face? Well, remember how we kept our copy in the other layer? That's now our front face. So if we look at the front face in relationship to the bevel, I'll just click on a background layer here, you can see that there's our front face, there's our bevel, and if we hold down the Shift key to get multiple background layers, there's our sides. So our logo is pretty much done except for assembling it all. And since it's all in 3 pieces here, it's very simple to give 3 different surface names, which we always want to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and say surface logo bevels, apply that, go to the faces, surface logo front, apply that, and then go to the sides, surface logo sides. Now let's combine them all into one layer. You just hold down the Shift key to select more than one foreground layer. So we've got the last 3 layers all selected. Then we can just say cut. It's going to get rid of them for a moment. Then we say paste, and it's going to put them all back into one layer. And again, the reason why we had to go through all this rigmarole is for these types of fonts. So that's the best way to avoid those types of beveling problems, is to use a positive shift and a negative inset instead of using a positive of both of those. Now I'd like to show you another macro that's useful for generating curved text. Alright, so I'm just going to go into a empty layer that we have here and select the curve text macro. This looks a little bit like the other text macro that we were using before, but you can only do one line of text in this one, and it has some other parameters too. So just to speed things up, I'm going to use the flat text type, and we'll pick the diamond font again, and I'm just going to type in a string here, and we'll see what happens. Okay, let me just center this in the screen, and you can see what it did. It actually took our fonts and curved them around in a nice curve up here. They're kind of smashed together though, and they're not quite evenly spaced apart. So there are things that we can do to fix that. But let's see what the parameters were to generate this text. Go back to the curved text. And one bad thing about this macro is that, again, the fonts jump back up to the top of the list, and so you have to keep going down and picking the same one over and over again. And it gets rid of your text. It doesn't maintain that in there like the text macro did. So let's just go ahead and type this curved text back in. Okay. Now before we continue here, let me just talk about the radius, the spacing, and the axis, which are basically the 3 settings that we're interested in this macro. The radius pertains to the amount of space that your letters are offset from the center of the 3D world. So if this is the 3D world, the center of the 3D world, your letters, when they're being curved, are going to be offset that amount. So in this case, 3 meters away from the center of the world. So as it's curving, they're all going to be offset 3 meters from the center of the world. Now the spacing has to do with the amount of space between the letters as they're being curved around. Now let's go ahead and increase that, and you'll see what a difference that makes. But we have to change layers here because I still have something in here. So I'll leave this one in here so we can see the difference. And of course, I'm going to type this back in. And let's change our spacing to 1 this time. And we got to change our font back too. Okay, well, we got an error here, and why is that? Need an empty layer for this operation. And if you look up here, all of our layers are filled up. So some of these modeler macros internally need to be able to copy things to other layers and then back to other layers. So as a general rule, it's best not to have all your layers filled up like this. So let's fix that. Let's just get rid of a few of these things in here that we don't need anymore. As you can see, for the most part, it did do our curved text. It just didn't do the back faces, which we don't need anyway, so it's no big deal. But if you look at the difference between the 0.6 spacing of the letters and the 1.0 spacing of the letters, you can see there's quite a bit of difference. So if you need to have your letters spaced out a lot further, just increase that spacing setting. Okay, now let's look at the axis setting. And the axis pertains to which axis of the world that the text is going to be curved around. In this case, it's curving around the Z, which would be basically pointing like that, and the text curves around like this. If we wanted the text to curve around like this, sort of like the ubiquitous logo coming around the planet kind of thing, we'd want to do that on the Y. And so, for example, we'll go into an empty layer and set up all of our things here again. Make our spacing 1, and we'll do it around the Y. Okay, now what happened to it? Well, it does kind of a weird thing when you do this on the Y. I'll hit the Control A so you can see where it is. Sure enough, it curved the text for us, and if we look at a top view of our text, we can see that it is curved around the Y-axis because the Y-axis is running right through here. So we've curved around it. Now again, it's generated these back faces here, which are totally useless because it's your text backwards. So you just don't need it at all. So the first thing you'll want to do is go in and get rid of it. But here's the weird thing it kind of does. Here's our center of our world right up here. Now see what it did? It actually shifted all the text down here, and I'm not sure why it does that. It's just sort of idiosyncrasy in the program, but you can get away from that very easily just by centering it with this center macro. And we'll just want to center that on 1D on the Y because we don't want it to mess up the way that it's modeled around the center of the world. So we'll just say center on the Y, and that centers it perfectly for us on all three axes. So those are some of the basic modeling tools that you have at your disposal for creating different types of text treatments. Now what we want to do is use those tools in conjunction with Lightwave and create an animation. And here's the animation that we're going to create. So here's our little Lightwave Tonight logo. And you can see we've got about 4 different types of objects moving around here. We've got the Lightwave object, we've got the Tonight object, we've got some beveled bars in the background there, and some little streaks shooting through there. And first of all, we want to talk about modeling those objects, and then we'll get into the actual animation of those objects. So let's talk about modeling. For this example, I've already created the text objects, the Lightwave and the Tonight objects. Now we're just going to create the beveled bar objects and the streak objects. So you can see I already have my Lightwave object here in one layer and my Tonight object here in another layer. And I'm basically just going to use those as size references for creating my beveled bars. So I know in the animation I want Tonight to come in under Lightwave, and I'm just going to get a size approximation here of where I want to put things. So I'm just going to move Tonight down a little bit. And again, they won't be saved out in these positions or anything like that. It's just for modeling the other parts of the logo that I'm doing this. So I'm just going to cut this, put it into the same layer as Lightwave, and then using the center macro, center everything up. Now I can tell how big I want to make my bars in relationship to the logo. So I'm going to go into another layer and throw my Lightwave Tonight into a background layer just so I can see it. And I'm just going to make a box. And I'm going to make it slightly behind the Lightwave and the Tonight. And I'll make it about this big. Something like that. And hit return to create it. Now I'm just going to bevel the front end. It should be very easy to do. So I'm going to select the front face of this bar object here and deselect everything I don't need. And I'm going to go ahead and bevel that, just the same way that we've been beveling the text. Now I don't need any of this stuff back here in the background anymore, so I'm just going to turn it off. And so hit B for bevel. Do the same thing. Now this time we'll just do 20 and 20 because we're not going to have any beveling problems because it's such a simple shape. And let's zoom in a little bit. Now that bevel looks kind of small, so let's just redo it with 40 and 40. There we go. That looks better. Okay. Now we want 5 of these things, but before we start mirroring them, we're going to center these, or center this one where he's supposed to be. Actually, I should have done that only on one axis because it put it back. It centered it on the z-axis, and I don't want that, so I'm just going to slide it back here a little bit. Okay. Now I'm ready to start mirroring. I'll just arbitrarily go in here and pick a spacing for the mirror function. Make sure it's the same every time, however. There we go. Now we don't want quite that many bars. 2, 3, 4, 5 is really all we want. So I'm going to get rid of these extra ones that were created. And finally, center the whole shoot and match here. Now we want to stretch these out too, make them quite a bit longer. So we'll just stretch them. Let's see where we are in relationship to our logo first. Okay, looking good. Now I'm just stretching them out, holding down the left mouse button and stretching. So there are our 5 bars with our logo in the background. Now we have those streaks that we're shooting along the insides of these gaps here, so we want to go ahead and make those streaks now. So the first thing we're going to do is just make one, and then we'll mirror those 2. It's kind of hard to see, but we have the bars in the background here, and here's the gap right here. Pull out a little bit. And streaks are fairly easy to make. Basically, they're just a box. And we're going to make this one about 5 meters long total. That looks good. All right, now we want to make it so that the rest of the streaks are also inside the gaps for the bars here. So we're just going to use mirror to do that. Put it in the center of the bar. Shove that one up there. And so we don't get those extra ones this time. Well, actually, that won't happen. And then we'll mirror the top 2. And there's our 4 streaks. So basically what I'm going to do right now is take these beveled bars as well as the streaks and shove them back so that they're modeled behind our logo, our Lightwave Tonight logo. And you can see that they're all lined up in the same place right now, which we don't want them to be. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select both foreground objects, the beveled bars and the streaks, and then modify and move them back so that they're behind the Lightwave Tonight object. That's better. So now we've modeled our beveled boxes for the background and also the streaks. The next step is to give them surface names so we can surface them in Lightwave. So all we're going to do for these bevel boxes is give it the surface name bevel boxes. Those are done. And we'll give the streaks all the same surface name. Streaks. Now the thing that we have to do with these 4 streaks is save them out individually so that we can animate them individually. So I'm going to cut them all into different layers. So just select this one, paste it into another layer. Same thing for the rest of them. Okay, so now we have 4 streaks and 4 separate layers, and so we're going to save those out. So we'll save those out as streak 1 and so on. Streak 2. Streak 4. Okay, so that takes care of modeling all of the objects in our scene. Now let's go ahead and set up the animation in Lightwave. First thing I want to do is surface one of these streaks so that you can get an idea of how we make the semi-transparent streaks. So the first thing I want to do is just render this streak by itself the way it is right now. You'll be able to see the difference when we start surfacing it. So I'm just going to push the camera in here and create a key quickly, and then I'll hit F9 to render out our streak. And there it is, a plain Jane streak. Now just to show you an example of fall off, and just to refresh your memory, I'm going to make this streak fall off from one color to the other, and then we'll use that same type of technique to generate the transparency. So right now we've got a streak that's a solid 200, 200, 200 white colored streak, and I want to make it fall off from white on one side to, say, blue on the other side. So we're going to go into Texture and select Grid. And we're going to pick a texture color of blue and a line thickness of 5. Now remember, our streak was 5 meters long total with a center of 0. So it's 2.5 meters on one side and 2.5 meters on the other side. Now this will be sort of important here in a minute. But we want the line thickness to always be thick enough to cover the entire object. So if we're talking about a streak that's 5 meters wide, we want the line thickness to be at least 5 meters wide. So we've got the line thickness set to 5.0, and we're going to make the texture center negative 2.5 on the X. And what that will do is put the texture center to one side of the object. We'll see what the result of this is. One more thing we have to do is set the texture fall off. And what the texture fall off does is, as it says, it's a percent per unit, and you could read that to say percent per meter. So if we want it to fall off from one texture to the other texture, and we want it to completely fall off from one texture to the other texture, we need to, from one end to the other end, make that 100% fall off. So if we have 5 meters total, we need a 20% fall off each meter to make 100% fall off total. So we're going to say 20% on the X, and let's just render that now, hitting F9. And our streak should fall off from blue to white. And sure enough, it does. Okay, so now that we have refreshed our memory on how texture fall off works, we're going to use that same exact principles for transparency fall off. So we're going to go back into surfaces, and we want our streak color to be sort of a light blue. We're going to turn off this texture, this white to blue fall off. And now we're going to go down into transparency. Right now our transparency is set to 0%. I'm going to go into texture, do the same exact thing we did with the color. Say grid, line thickness 5, texture center, negative 2.5 on the X, fall off 20% per unit on the X, and the texture value 100%. Now let's see what happens. You can see what's happening here. The streak is transparent on the left side, fully opaque on the right side. And that's basically all there is to generating a streak. And streaks are one of the most popular things that I've found that sort of beef up any kind of network-looking animation. If you watch any kind of network television animation, you're bound to see these kinds of streaks flying around there in the background. And it's these types of things, these little nirnies, if you will, flying around in the background that sort of give animations that network quality look. And that's what I've found that a lot of people don't do in their animations. If they do a flying logo animation, they just throw the logo up there and that's pretty much it. But really good flying logo animations do take a lot of time and work to set up to make them look really good. And these are just one of those little effects that you can throw in there that will beef your animation up to make it really look high-end. Okay, So now we have our surface generated that we like for our streak. I'm just going to go ahead and save that surface out so that we can copy it onto the rest of the streaks. So I'll just say save surface, streak surf. Okay. And now we'll save that object back out over itself and load in the rest of the streaks. Got all 4 streaks loaded in there. Okay, now that we have our streaks taken care of, I'm going to go ahead and load in some pre-surfaced versions of the Lightwave Tonight logo that we already had seen in Modeler. So I'm just going to load that in. Load in the Lightwave, and load in the Tonight, and load in a pre-surfaced version of the bevel bars that we created in Modeler. So now let's look at our scene in layout. It's a top view, back view, zoom in a little bit. Now you can see that Lightwave and Tonight, it's kind of hard to see, but Lightwave and Tonight are sort of mashed in on top of each other. And that's because that's the way they were modeled. We didn't model them on top of each other because I wanted to keep them separated so that I could give them 2 separate motions. Now this is about a 180 frame animation, so I'm going to say I want my objects, the Lightwave and the Tonight, to come to a stop at say a frame 150. That way they'll still give me like an extra second or so for the streaks to keep going by at the end. So I want to go ahead and set up the motion paths for the Lightwave and the Tonight as well as the streaks, and then I'll set up the motion path for the camera. So I'm just going to move the Lightwave object up here and create a key at 150. That's where we want it to be when it ends. And we'll just jump back to sort of a faraway view of everything, an XY view. And this is like we're looking from behind the camera. You can see the camera right there in front of us. We're going to take the Lightwave object and on the X shove it back over here a way. It's just off screen. And we'll create a key at 0 for that. Now we'll let's go ahead and go to frame 150 so we can see where the Lightwave ends up. Zoom back in. And now I'm going to move the Tonight object down below the Lightwave object. Only on the Y. Create a key for it at 150 as well. Okay, now just sort of as a refresher, here's the animation again, and you can see how the Lightwave comes in from the side and the Tonight actually comes in from the back there. And also notice that we do have a little pad there at the end for when the animation stops or the logos come to a rest, the animation continues on just so we let the streaks go by a couple more passes. So now we need to go in and set up Tonight to come in from behind the camera. Okay, now we're ready to move the streaks and give them their motions. So let me just look back from behind the camera here, and we'll take this streak and move him on the X, well out of the camera's view. Create a key at 0 for him there, and then shove him over off the screen. Let me pull back a little bit. And create a key there for him at, say, 50 or something like that. And what this is going to do is he's going to be moving from 0 to 50, and then we're going to put a repeat on him so he just keeps going over and over and over again. And the way we do that is to go into the motions and click on repeat. So as you can see, as we slide the slider, the streak is just going to keep repeating its motion over and over as time goes by. Now we're going to do that same kind of thing for the rest of the streaks. So we'll move him back. Key at 0. Key at 50. At 0. Key at 50. One more streak. Okay, now we have to go turn on repeat for these other streaks. I'm hitting M on the keyboard to bring up the motion panels. Alright, so now we have repeat on all of them. Now the other thing you can see here is that the streaks are pretty much moving all at the same rate there. And if you remember in the animation, they were sort of offset a bit. So what you can do is go in and create sort of a holding point for the different streaks. So the first streak will just go from 0 to 50. The second streak might sit there from 0 to 5 and then go. And the next streak may sit there from 0 to 10 and then go. And the next streak, so on and so on. So to create an offset like that, all you need to do is, we're already at frame 0 for streak 2. Let's just create another key for him at, well, let's make it 10 so he waits a little bit longer before he comes on. And make that a linear keyframe there so it's not moving at all. It's just sitting there from frame 0 to 10. And let's up his keyframe from 50 to 60. So now he's got a keyframe at 0, 10, 50, and 60. Well, we don't want that 50 in there, so we're just going to delete this. So basically what that's done for us is stretched out his keyframe. So he's sitting there from frame 1 to 10, and then he is going from 10 to 60. And let's see how that affects his motion here. There we go. So you see how he's sort of offsetting himself from the first streak, from the top streak there. So this guy waits 10 frames after this guy takes off, and then he starts to move. And we can do the same types of things for these other two streaks very simply. You can just go back to 0, create a key at, say, 20, turn on linear, go to its next key, which is still 50, and make it 70. We're just increasing by 10 each time. Delete that key at 50. We don't need that. Now for streak number 4, we'll hold him here until 30. Make it linear. And then we'll change that to 80 instead of 50. And so we're just deleting keyframe 50. Now you can see we've got all these different offset streaks. They're all waiting to go at different times. And that just gives our animation a little bit of verisimilitude, make it a little more interesting than having the streaks all going at once. Okay, now we're getting pretty close to actually moving the camera and tweaking our motions, and so they're just right. So we're going to go with the last frame that we want the camera to be moving at, and that would be frame 150, because that's also when the Tonight and Lightwave come to a stop. So let's look at things from the camera's point of view. Now I'm going to move the camera over and down a little bit. Now what we're doing here is setting up our final keyframe for the animation. Maybe give it a little of a bank here. And we could tweak this all day if we wanted to, but for argument's sake, I'm just going to say this is good. And give it its key at 150. Now let's go ahead and look at this from the camera point of view, and we'll start to get an idea of how our motion goes. Okay, that's looking good. Now let's go back and look at the animation one more time, and we'll see how the camera is being moved instead of any of the other objects. The camera is the one doing the really weird moves. The rest of the objects are just moving from point A to point B in a very linear, straight motion. So let's look at the animation one more time. Okay, now keep in mind, you know how the motion paths are shaping up for the rest of the objects. So the camera is doing kind of a weird move here. It's actually starting out at a very strange angle and pulling back and sort of rotating as it pulls back. And it's much easier to keep track of this one object, being the camera. It's much easier to move the camera in this weird way than it would be to put all of these different objects at a weird angle and try to match them up. So this is kind of the tip that I'm trying to convey here, is that it's much easier to keep all of your objects at easy to work with orientations than it is to keep the camera straight on and have your objects all at weird orientations, just to get that last perspective that we want. So let's go ahead and finish up the motions on the animation. Okay, so we know how the rest of the motions are moving. Let's go ahead and finish setting up the camera here. Camera's going to start out at this end of the bevel bars, almost completely off of them. And let's go ahead and create a key at 0 here. Now we're going to rotate it so it's sort of looking off here. Now I can see that my light wave is already in frame, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and create my key for my camera here. At the same time, I'm going to go back and select the light wave object, move him on the X so he's off the screen, create a key for him at 0. Now let's check out the animation here. So there comes the light wave object. We fly through the tonight object, and we set. Now there's one other thing we need to do to really give this a professional look, and that's the ease in or ease out function. And you do that by using tension and setting it to 1 for each object that you want to ease in. So for the light wave object, we'll just go to its final keyframe, go into spline controls, set tension to 1, do the same way with tonight, set its tension to 1, and we'll do the same thing for the camera as well. Set its tension to 1. And what that's going to do, and I'll just do a bounding box here, is make all of those objects, the camera, the light wave, and the tonight, ease in when they come to a stop. So they won't just, bam, slam in there, and that doesn't look very good when that happens. And here's the final animation. So the major point of that animation is, again, let your camera do the work and keep your objects at simple and easy to use orientations. Now we're going to take a look at an animation that incorporates the streaking logo. So you'll recognize this effect, this sort of trail left behind the logo as it flies up, and then it is sort of doing a light speed kind of thing here where the trail eventually catches up with it, but our logo is moving at such a high rate of speed that light can't even keep up with it, I guess. So, and this streaking logo effect was made popular by the first Superman movie. The credits of that incorporated that, and you started seeing that a lot after that. So we're going to show you how to do that right now. Once again, here's our handy dandy logo that we've made, and there's nothing special about this part of the logo or about the object. It's exactly like what we did before. It's just a beveled version of these fonts. But the trick is, when doing the streaking logo animation, is the trail object. It's actually a separate object than the logo object. So we're just going to take a flat version of that logo object, which I had in another layer, and just extrude it out a little ways on the z-axis. And you can see it doesn't have to be extruded very much. And here it is in relationship to the other part of the logo. Its face is still on the front, sort of the front face of the other part of the logo. Now, again, these are two separate objects. These are going to have to be two separate objects, and they should have two separate surfaces too. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of the front face. We don't need these on the streak object, and we don't really need the back face either, so we're going to get rid of those as well. Give this its own surface name called, we'll call this the streak. And this object already has its own surface name, so we don't have to worry about that. So now let's go into Lightwave and set up the motion path for making the streak object work. Okay, so I'm going to load in my logo and load in the streak for the logo. Got it from the camera's point of view. Nothing too special about that. Let's go ahead and set up our camera just like we did in the previous animation for the last frame of the animation. And we're going to set it up at a bizarre angle here. Something like that. Back it off just a little bit. Okay. Right now, if we look at a top view, you can see that our streak object is running over the top of our other logo object. And we don't want that. We want the front of it to be butted up to the back end of the other object. So what I want to do is parent the streak object to the logo object. That's the first thing I'm going to do. So it will travel with the logo object wherever it goes. So I'm parenting this object to the logo object. Okay, so now it's parented. So now if I move the logo around, the streak will follow it wherever it goes. Simple parenting there. Now what I want to do is, I don't want this streak object to overlap, which it's doing now. I don't want it to overlap the logo object. So I'm going to move that streak object back and create a keyframe for it. So I'm going to move it back until they just line up. So now we've got our streak back here and our regular solid logo right here. I'm going to create a keyframe for the streak now. Okay, now we can we're looking at this from the camera's point of view, and initially we're going to want our streak to be way stretched out. So I'm just going to click on stretch it out in the Z, so it goes way far away. And just create a key for it at frame 0. And I'm also going to move my logo, the logo object, the solid logo object, back on the Z. So now you can see how simple it is to move the logo, just moving it back and forth. If we look at it on a top view, I'm just moving it in a straight line. Pull back a little bit. Moving it in a straight line, and since our camera is in the weird orientation, it's still very simple to move our logo. So I'm going to go ahead and move it, clear out a frame, create a key for it at 0. Then I'm just going to hit reset to bring it back to the center of the screen and create a key for it, say frame 100 or something like that. And we'll set our last key as 120. And we'll just slide through it here. So there comes our logo. Now the only thing we have left to do is make the streak catch up with it, which is very simple to do too. So we're going to make the streak have a key at frame 100 as well. And we're going to create a key for it there. And now we're going to stretch it on the Z completely to 0. And that's basically going to squash it all the way up into nothing until it's smashed right into the back end of the logo. And we're going to create a key for it there at frame 120. So it's going to wait a little bit before it catches up with the rest of the logo. Probably a good idea to turn linear on too, to keep it from doing any kind of weird stretching during the animation. So let's see, just slide it here forward, and there it catches up with it. Let's just do a quick bounding box of it right now. As you can see, this is a pretty quick and easy thing to set up, and it's quite effective actually. So if you don't have too much time in your hands for setting up an animation, this would be a good bang for your buck type of effect to use. And here's the bounding box. Okay, one other thing I want to do here before this animation is complete is put some tension on both of these objects. As you can see, it's just kind of slamming in there, and again, that doesn't look very professional. So all we have to do is on the last frame of where the logo parks, tension to 1. Same thing for the streak. Go to its last frame, set its tension to 1. Now I'm just going to create a wireframe preview here so that we can see the effect that changing those tensions have on our logo. And you'll find that setting tension to 1 on the logo and the streak itself are going to make the parking motion smoother. And here you go. Now let me show you how to set up the streak object surface. The logo streak surface is actually fairly simple. All it is a sort of blue color here for the object. Set transparency to around 82%. You can make that more or less if you want. 50% would probably be okay too. And we also turned on double-sided. Double-sided lets us see both sides of the polygons that make up the logo streak object. Now this effect does come with a price, and that's increased rendering time. Anytime you have a complex transparent object like the streak object, you're going to have increased rendering times because Lightwave has to calculate all those different levels of transparency on top of each other. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about using this effect, that you should probably only use it when you have logos that are fairly unpolygon intensive. In other words, they're not too complex. I chose this particular font, the Diamond font, because it's square and doesn't create a lot of polygons around edges or things like that, around curves or things like that. So that's exactly why I chose this font, because these frames were taking 14 minutes a frame to render with all those levels of transparency. So it's just something to be aware of. One other thing to note with respect to the surfacing of the logo object in that animation is that all of the different surfaces have slightly different settings. I always like to do that with my objects. It seems to make all the different edges stand out a little better. So you can see that the sides have a 70% reflectivity, the logo fronts have 100% reflectivity, and the bevel has 80% reflectivity. So here's just a final look at the streaking logo animation. You should also notice that this logo animation is field rendered as opposed to frame rendering. And I always like to field render logo animations because they look a lot cleaner, they look a lot smoother, and almost every network animation that you see is field rendered. It effectively doubles the frame rate. Instead of being 30 frames a second, it's effectively 60 frames a second, and it just looks a lot cleaner. Now I'm going to show you another trick that you see all the time but is not so easy to do in Lightwave until you know the trick, and that is the moving sheen effect. And here's an animation that shows that. So here's the moving sheen, not to be confused with the Martin sheen or the Charlie sheen, but as you can see, we've got this nice glint going across the front of the logo here, and it took me a long time to figure out how to do this, and once I did figure out how to do it, it would seem so simple that I was just sort of smacking myself in the head for not realizing it. But I tried all sorts of fancy things to get this effect. I tried polygons with slashes cut out in them with lights shooting through them, trying to get this effect on front of polygons and front of logos, and I never could do it. But once I figured it out, it seemed like second nature, and so now I'm passing this huge chunk of knowledge on to you. The big trick to the moving sheen animation is in the reflection map. And if we look at the surfaces of the sheen, we look at the sheen face. We've got the sheen sides and the sheen face. The sheen face has a reflection map called Sheen Map. And let's just take a look in the thumbnail at what that looks like. You can see it's just a bunch of stripes that basically fall off from black to white to black. And this was created in Toaster Paint, and I'll show you how to create that. Now to set up the diagonal sheen map, all we need to do is paint some diagonal stripes in paint with a range from black to white. So we'll just select black as our color and select white as our other color. And basically you just go in with the polygon tool and start drawing these diagonal lines from top to bottom of the screen that look like this. And space them out a little bit, make them fairly skinny for a good sheen map. If you make them too thick, you're not going to see the sheen. Your whole logo will just start to get brighter all of a sudden. So I'm just going to go ahead and load in the map that I use and render that out and show you what it looks like. As you can see, there's lots of these stripes, and they're very skinny, just falling off from black to white. And I'll just render that out. You can just save this map into your images directory or wherever you save your images, and save it as an RGB from Paint. Now let's go back into Lightwave. There are actually two tricks to this trick, and the first trick we just showed you, which is the diagonal stripes for your reflection map. The second trick is to parent the camera to the object and rotate the object. Now, why are we doing that? Well, if you think of it this way, if this is your object, if this is your sheen logo, if this is your logo that you want the sheen to move across, it's basically inside of a big sphere with that sheen map wrapped all the way around it. And if you rotate the object, the sheen is going to the reflection of the sheen is going to slowly move across the face of your object. So why do we need to parent the camera to that? Well, that's what makes the lock off. if we have your camera here and your object here, and the camera is parented to the object, as the object turns, the camera is going to go with it. Now, the viewer's not going to know this is happening because nothing is changing in the background. And if we look at the animation one more time, you'll see that that's the case. So again, this is just a reflection moving across the surface of the moving Sheen logo, and the camera is locked to it in the layout, and we'll show you how we do that right now. So now we're back in Lightwave, and if we look at the top view, we see our object, and here's our camera. And what we want to do is parent the camera to the object. So I'm going to select the camera, click on Parent, and say MS, which is moving Sheen, is our parent object. Now if you watch the camera down here, as I rotate this object, you'll see that the camera rotates right along with it. Just a simple parenting we've done here. Now all you have to do is create a motion path for the moving Sheen object. So we've already got a key at frame 0 here, so let's just rotate it a little bit. Let's say 40 degrees, and create another key at frame 120. Make a quick bounding box preview. You can see the object's rotating, camera's rotating right along with it. Now let's look at it from the camera's point of view. Do another preview. Now you can see the object doesn't appear to be moving. The only way you can tell that it's moving is the Z and the Z are moving around on the screen. You're not going to be able to tell that anything's happening. It's just going to look like the object's just sitting there and the sheen's just moving across it. Another thing you're going to want to do is parent your lights to the object too, because we don't want the object to turn away from the light accidentally. And so by parenting the light to the object, it's going to move with the object as well. And let's do that right now. So we click on the light. All we have to do is say parent to the moving sheen, and the light stays in the exact same position it was. So we won't have any problems with that now. One of the disadvantages of doing it this way is, sure, you have this nice object sitting there with this nice sheen moving across it, but what if you want to fly the object in? What if you want to have streaks going in the background or things like that? Well, what you need to do is parent all of those objects to a null object, and we've got an animation that shows the combination of the moving sheen effect being parented to the null object. Now this animation still has a moving sheen here if you'll watch at the end, and there goes the sheen right there. But how did we achieve this effect? How did we still have all this stuff going on in the background with the moving logo and still have the sheen effect work? Well, like I said, it was because we parented everything to a null. And it makes it a little more complex, but it does have a nice effect once your logo has come to a stop here. So let's see how we do that. Okay, so now all we have presently is the logo rotating, the camera parented to it. Let's make it so that we can fly this logo in and still have the moving sheen effect happening. Well, the way we do that is by parenting this to a null. Let's load in a null object. Actually in 3.1 you can just add a null object, which is very nice, so you don't even have to load anything in. You say add null object and it pulls a null object in for you. And let me just select the null object so you can see what I'm talking about. It's this little point right here. That's the guy that's going to be doing all the rotation for us. So all we're going to do is set up a rotation for the null object right now. So he's already got a key at frame 0. Let's rotate his heading a little bit and watch down here, because you won't be able to see anything happening up here. Just rotate it, say 50 degrees, and create a key at, say, 150. Now what we want to do is parent our moving sheen object to the null object. We also want to parent the camera to the null object. So we need to get rid of the keyframes that we already had for our moving sheen. So I'm just going to go in and delete that. So it's just going to sit there now. Now I'm going to say parent moving sheen to the null object. And I'm also going to say, click on the camera, say parent the camera to the null object. So now we've got moving sheen and camera parented to the null object, which is right in the middle there. Let's just slide it back and forth to see what happens. looks exactly the same as what we had before, except now we have the freedom to fly that logo in if we want to. Because our motion paths are locked to the null, it doesn't matter what we do with the Sheen object. I have the freedom to take my object and do some kind of a move on it here. Just rotate it. Move it out of frame or something. Create a key for it at 0, then we'll just reset it and create a key for it at, say, frame 100. Now you can see this curved path that we have going on here. That's because it's locked to the moving null. And let's just slide through it here. Comes in. Need to add some more frames, I guess. Let's make our last frame 150. Its motion ends at 120, and so it's got an additional 30 frames to just sit there and have the sheen go across it. So if we just slide through it, it sets, and then the animation continues, and you can see we're still rotating there a little bit. Let me just quickly create a bounding box here. So he's going to come flying in, and he can do whatever kind of motion that he wants to, and when, after he sets, he's still going to continue having the moving sheen go across him because he's locked to the null, which is rotating, as is the camera, and as should be the light, which we'll take care of here in a second. So there you go. You can do any kind of a move you want now as long as you're locked to that null, which is rotating. And we'll parent our light to the null object too. Now we need to take care of the moving streaks in the background, the diagonal streaks. And the way we're going to do that is with a null object as well, but that null object is going to be parented to the null object that we're using for rotation. So try to stay with me here because it might get a little hairy. First thing we want to do is just go ahead and load in a streak. So we just load the object. We'll load in one of the streaks that we made for our Lightwave Tonight animation. And there it is. Notice that streak's just sitting there because it doesn't have any motion and it's not parented to the null yet. Before we parent this streak to our null, let's clone it a few times, but before we clone it, let's parent it to its own null. I'll repeat that here in a minute. Okay, so we're adding another null object. We've got two null objects in there. Null number 1 is used as our lock to the rotation to cause our moving sheen effect. Null number 2 is going to be used to make our streaks move in a diagonal motion and be locked to null number 1. So now we've got null object number 2 in here in our streak, and we're going to say, streak 1, you are parented to null object number 2. Now what we can do is just give our streak a quick and easy motion path. So we'll just move it on the X, starting off screen, give it a key at 0, move it on the X across the screen, give it a key at, say, 35, go into its motion by hitting M and hitting repeat. Now remember, this streak is parented to a null. And now we've got this streak that just goes straight across the screen. But what we want it to do is go diagonally. Now instead of actually rotating the streak and having it and rotating it up here and making keyframes for it, we want to make it as simple as possible. So the simplest thing to do is to set up this straight linear motion that we have going on here of the streak. And since it's parented to the null, all we have to do to make it diagonal is rotate this null. And let me pull back to a back view so you can sort of see everything. So there's our streak, here's our camera and our logo. Now I'm going to rotate null number 2, which has the streak parented to it. So I'm going to just bank it. Now you'll see that streak changing orientations here. So I'm going to create a key for null object number 2. And while I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and parent null object number 2 to null object number 1. So I say parent to null object number 1. And what we've done here is made it so that we could easily set up a linear motion for our streak without having to make any kind of weird orientations. So all we had to do was bank, null object number 2, which the streak is parented to. Now if we look at through the camera, since it's parented, we've got a nice diagonal streak going across there, and it maintains its orientation to the logo the whole time. Now it's just a matter of adding more of these streaks. So all we need to do now is just clone a few of them. And then we'll offset their positions a little bit. So we'll go to Lightwave Streak 2, move it down on the Y a little bit. Do the same thing for it here. Same thing for 3. I'm not too concerned about making sure their spacing is just right. And I'll move this guy up a little bit. Okay. So now we all have all these streaks parented to the same null object, and that null object is parented to our rotational null object, which is taking care of the moving sheen effect. And again, all of these streaks are going at the same time, so we know how to fix that. We can just go in and add some delays and offset their motion from the other streaks a little bit. So let's go ahead and set up those offsets for those streaks so that we can stagger them a little bit. Let's go to streak number 2. And again, we'll look at this from a little easier vantage point here. Create a key for him at 10. And create a key for him at 45. Delete his key we already had at 35. And we'll do the same thing for number 3. Create a key for him at, say, 20. And another key at, say, 55. Delete his key at 35. And number 4, same thing. Create a key at 30. Where he is at 35, we'll change that to 65. Get rid of the key at 35 and turn on linear. Let's do a quick bounding box here, and you'll see our object come in, our streaks coming in staggered, and the whole time the entire scene is rotating around null point number 1. That's going to give us the moving sheen effect on the logo after it sets, and still allows nernys and streaks to go on in the background. There's a rule that I go by when I do this moving sheen effect, and that's to make the rotational value, the heading value of whatever's rotating, whether you're doing the lock to a null and rotating the null, or whether you're just doing the logo and rotating that. And the rule is, based on a map like we showed you of those diagonal streaks, based on that map, rotating the object 0.4 of a degrees for every frame that your animation is going to give you about the right rotational speed to make a nice, smooth, slow sheen move across your object. So for every frame, rotate your object 0.4 degrees, and so that's pretty easy to figure out. And so here's a final look at the moving sheen animation. By using these parenting techniques, you can set up a lot of complex animation very quickly. The streaks, nernys and things like that, you can just give very simple motions, parent them to a null, rotate the null, and you've got an instant diagonal move instead of a sort of boring horizontal move. And the sheen effect, every client wants that, it seems like. So combine those two things together, and not only will you save time, but you'll also impress your clients. Okay, now we want to move on to the last thing I want to show you, which is a tool that I came up with for creating flying logo animations very quickly and very easily. Here's a flying logo animation that's sort of akin to all the types of effects we've been talking about today. You can see all of the streaks going on in the background, a nice smooth motion path, and reflections going on there, and just the different types of movement going on in the background. The difference with this animation is it wasn't created by hand in Lightwave. It was created with a program from Axiom Software called WaveMaker. And WaveMaker will basically let you take in any logo that you create in Modeler, like we just did today, and set up a very complex looking flying logo animation like this one in about 5 to 10 minutes. And let's show you how that works. And before we actually get into the animation using WaveMaker, I just want to show you that this is just your standard Lightwave format object, and the only thing special about it is that we just have to remember to model it in this orientation so that it looks right in the face window. If you can read it correctly in the face window, WaveMaker will take care of everything else. Even if you don't have it centered properly, if it's like way off center here somewhere, WaveMaker will take it, put it in the center, shrink it down to the size that it needs, and go from there with it. So really the only thing you need to remember is make sure that it's modeled properly and that you can read it in the face window. Now let's go ahead and go into WaveMaker. Now I'm using the left Amiga and the M key, holding down left Amiga, hitting M, to cycle through all the different programs that I have running at the same time. And that would be WaveMaker and a few other things in Lightwave. Now the nice thing about WaveMaker is it will directly control Lightwave for you. So once you're at WaveMaker, you really don't have to worry about going into Lightwave until you're ready to start the animation. So the first thing you do in WaveMaker is select the logo that you want to use. And we were already using this super logo that I just showed you, so I'll just select the super logo, and it will scale it to the proper size that it needs and save it back out as superlogo.wmobj, and that's how you can tell that the logo has been scaled, has this WMOBJ at the end of it. So that logo is now our current logo, and now all we need to do is quickly set up our motion paths. And WaveMaker lets you set up 3 different types of motions. You have an on motion, you have a hold position, and you have an off motion. And to set up a motion, all you do is, say you want an on motion, go through and choose the type of path that you want. So if you want it to come in from the lower right hand corner, you can just choose that. If you want this type of a move where it comes in from the bottom of the screen and swings around, which is what we have in the animation that we're working on, you can just select that. Now we'll pick a hold position, and this is the orientation that your logo will be at when it comes to rest in the center of the screen during your animation. So we'll just pick that hold position. And we're not going to pick an off motion, but we could if we wanted to. Now we could have our logo come on, sit there for a moment, and then go off if we wanted to, but for this animation we're just going to have it come on and hold in the hold position that we've specified. Now the next thing we want to do is set up the durations for all of the moves. Right now these are the default durations. The motion start delay means that it's going to wait 15 frames. The logo is going to wait 15 frames or half a second before it starts to move at all. Then it's going to take 120 frames to do its on motion, and then the animation, the entire animation, is going to continue going 60 frames after the motion has ended for the logo. So basically it sits there for 15 frames, comes on in 120 frames, and then the entire animation continues for another 60 frames until it ends for a total of 195 frames or 6.5 seconds. And we'll just leave those default settings there. Now we can pick our background types. We can either pick a solid color if we want to for our background. We can pick a gradient and pick different gradient types. And we'll use this dark to light gradient from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen. And we'll pick our dark color, which is black, which is fine. And we'll pick our light color. We'll make that a little bit of a darker blue. And we're done. We've got our background set up. Now one of the most unique things that WaveMaker will do is throw in all of the nernnies that we've been talking about automatically for you. So basically this includes your streaks, confetti, fireworks, different things like that. These are all the different types of elements that you can have in the background while your logo is flying around on the screen. And you've got 2 banks of these. And the ones I'm going to throw in there first are the thin gap bevels. And these are actually just some lines in the background that will not be moving because I'm going to turn their movement off. They could be moving if we wanted them to, but I'll just click on the little stop sign here so they don't move, and we'll make those blue. Since our background is blue, they should blend in nicely. Now I should explain a little bit about these element layers here. Think of these 8 layers as wallpaper. Basically you put down layer 1, so that's the farthest away layer. Layer 2 would be your next layer, and so it's a little bit closer than layer 1. Layer 8 would be the closest layer to you. Layer 1 would be the furthest one away. So we've laid down our lines in the background which aren't moving, and now it's time to lay down some streaks and then some stars. So to do the streaks, we can just say for layer 2 we want diagonal streaks, we want them going at a medium speed, we want them to be thin as opposed to very thin, we want a lot of them, and we want it to be a shadow color. And basically what we're going to do here is fake out a shadow. So we've got diagonal streaks with a shadow color. Now we want to pick this exact same thing, so we're going to go back into it, diagonal streaks, thin, but this time we're going to make them blue. Now you can see that in layer 2 we have diagonal streaks and they have a shadow color. In layer 3 we have diagonal streaks, the same type of diagonal streaks, and they have a blue color. And what this is going to do is the shadow color is going to be back here and the exact same streak is going to be in front of it with the blue color, and they're going to be moving at the same sort of rate, but they're going to be slightly offset. So it's going to look like the blue streak is casting a black shadow, but it's not really. Alright, so we have our streak set up. Now we're going to set up our stars that are rotating in the corners with the fancy star ring. We're going to do the same thing with this. We're going to say we want you down in the lower right hand corner. You can put these rotating elements in any of these positions in the screen. So selecting this means that it's going to go rotate around the lower right hand corner. This is clockwise and counterclockwise, and here's the color again. So we'll make a shadow for that. And a shortcut here is just to hit the C key on the keyboard, and that will let you copy a layer into another layer. So you can just say C, copy, and it says copy layer 4, copy layer 4-2, and we're copying it to layer 5. So it puts exactly what we selected in layer 4 into layer 5. Now we're going to go back in and change it from a shadow to a metal. So now what do we have? In the very far background we have our thin gap bevels. In front of that we have some diagonal streaks with fake shadows, and in front of that we have a star ring with a fake shadow. Now we want to put one more star ring in the upper left hand corner. So all we need to do is copy 4 to 6. Copy layer 4 to 6. So C4, 6. And C5, 7. Now all we have to do is change this to the upper left hand corner instead of the lower right hand corner for both the shadow and the colored element. And we're done setting up our elements. Now you can go into Mr. Camera if you'd like. So you can click on back a little bit to make your logo appear a little bit smaller in frame, or you can click on a little closer and make your logo appear a little bit bigger in frame. You're just moving your camera a little bit closer or a little bit further back. We'll leave it at the default position for right now. Click on render mode. This brings up the different types of quality settings for Lightwave. If you click low resolution, it's just going to be low resolution with no anti-aliasing or anything like that. Medium res, same thing, only it's going to be medium resolution. Then you can click on broadcast quality, and broadcast quality will automatically set all of the settings that I always use for my flying logo animations. It's going to turn on field rendering, it's going to turn on medium resolution and low anti-aliasing. It does all that stuff for you and you don't have to think about it. Now that we have all of those things set up, we've got our logo picked, we've got the motion for the logo, how long everything's going to take, the background, and the elements that we want going, our camera position, and the render mode. We can save this script out that we've just created, and Lightwave will generate it, or WaveMaker will generate it actually. So we'll call this Super Logo, WM. At the same time that it's saving out this script that we've just generated, WaveMaker is actually creating a scene file that Lightwave can understand. So not only does it create that scene file, it also loads it into Lightwave. So if you have Lightwave and WaveMaker running at the same time, Lightwave will automatically be loading the scenes that you've just created in WaveMaker. So this allows you to quickly go in, change a few things, save it out, and re-render changes. But now we can go into Lightwave, or we don't even have to go into Lightwave if we don't want to render a frame. We could just say render a frame, render straight from WaveMaker if we wanted to, say render the last frame, and Lightwave would, bam, start rendering that frame for us. I'm not going to wait for that to finish. But if we go into Lightwave, again I'm hitting left Amiga M to cycle through, look at it from the camera's point of view, here's all our star objects, and here's the bars that we picked for our background. You'll see the streaks start coming in right there. There's our logo flying in as a box. And there you go. That's how quickly you can set up flying logo animation with WaveMaker. And this can save you a lot of time, especially for tedious tasks such as confetti, which if you have each piece of confetti have an individual motion path can take you a long time to do. WaveMaker can take care of that for you and make it very simple. So let's take a look again at the super logo animation that we've just generated with WaveMaker. So you can see we've set up a pretty snazzy little flying logo scene here, and it only took us about 5 minutes. And that's really the point of WaveMaker, is to make flying logo scenes easy to generate and automatic to generate. So this saves you a lot of time, a lot of work, and you can either just take these scenes the way that WaveMaker pumps them out for you, or you can take them and modify them to your own needs. Either way, it will save you a lot of time. Now WaveMaker is also good for just creating generic background scenes, moving background scenes that you can use in your other productions, that you can key CG pages over the top of, or use as background images or background sequences for your other animations. Let me show you a couple. Here's just an example of a generic background that you can create, just a simple moving element there in the foreground. Another example would be something like this, just a couple of moving elements in either corner, and notice that they have the fake drop shadows on them as well. WaveMaker also comes with what are called prefabs, prefabricated animations. And these are animations that are 100% pre-configured, pre-set up for you, and then all you do is say, I want to put my logo in that animation, and that's what you do. And here's what some of those look like. There are several different genres of animations included with WaveMaker. Here's sort of a classical type of animation, sort of a stuffy type of animation. Here's kind of a wild, colorful type of animation. Here's one that includes some little streak action going on in the foreground. And again, you just say, I want to put my logo in that animation. And when you render it, your logo appears in there instead of the ones you see now. Here's one other one. Well, that's about all the time for this tape. I hope some of these tips will help save you time in your flying logo animations. And just remember that a good flying logo animation can become a great flying logo animation without a whole lot of extra effort. But it is those little things, the streaks going in the background and those types of things, that will make your animations stand out from everybody else. So until next time, I'm Tony Stutterheim. Goodbye.